Morning. Nope. Afternoon. This is the fifth part of a series entitled The Woman with 1.5 Hands. If you've been dutifully following along, which is to say, you viewed part 1 first, part 2 second, etc., then you probably aren't lost. However, if you're just skipping around and you're here, if you aren't lost already, you soon will be. That said, this is a sidebar, an extra long sidebar, and it originated because I stated at the end of part 4 that, quote, to design one's whole approach to an issue based on rare exceptions to the rule is often misguided, end quote. This statement concerned a hypothetical statutory situation that involved a 16 and an 18-year-old couple. Part 6 picks up with that couple. This part, though, pivots so nicely off of that quote that I felt it was a perfect time to mention the following. Here goes. To design one's whole approach to an issue based on rare exceptions to the rule is often misguided. For instance, too many women base the bulk, if not the entirety, of their approach to rape awareness, rape defense strategy, in terms of the exception, namely stranger rape, i.e., some guy waiting for them in a parking garage or leaping out at them from behind the bushes. And they do so at their own peril. Put another way, way too many become victims in part because during their anti-rape strategizing sessions, their focus is all too often on the high-profile rarities, which means, ipso facto, they aren't paying enough attention to another area of concern. A demographic category the NVAWS report describes thusly: 76% of all rapes are perpetrated by members of this group. Now, if you're a woman and just did a little ipso factoring on your own here, I've got good news and bad news. The good news? If you jumped ahead and calculated that this 76% figure includes men that you know, you're at least partially correct. The bad news? The That You Know campaign started out as a good thing, but through a series of steps got co-opted or hijacked and then repackaged into an old familiar package, i.e. it got supplanted, or one might say there's now a pod person campaign in its place. Step 1. The original unaltered 76%, the 76% that Jade and Tone describe, does include men that you know, to wit, he's a guy you went out with at least once, he's a man you claim to be your boyfriend, a man you married, an ex-boyfriend, or an ex-husband. All these guys have one thing in common. You at one time chose to date him. Note, as we don't arranged marriages in these parts, I'm assuming married couples dated each other at least once. To be clear, according to those who conducted the NVAW survey and other researchers listed in my notes, every time an American woman gets raped, there's a 76% probability that the guy who raped her occupies one or more of these categories: hubby, boyfriend or ex, or a guy you willingly went out with at least once. Step 2. As far as modern rape awareness goes, the definition of a man that you know got expanded to include A, that creepy neighbor down the street who, though he's never said anything untoward towards you or near you, just happens to always wear grubby torn sweatpants when he works on his jalopy in front of his rented house or apartment, and B, the janitor who works at your office who, though he hasn't said or done anything creepy to you or near you, just happens to creep you out almost every time you see him, and similar others who share commonalities like you know where they work and or you know where they live. Oh, and you'd never date any of them. At this point it should be noted that early incarnations of this 76% figure specifically referred to men, quote, that you know intimately, end quote. And by intimately, these social scientists, among them Mary Koss, credited with founding the that you know intimately category in the early 80s, were clearly referencing the 5 types of intimate associates listed in Step 1 only: boyfriends, husbands, exes, dates. That's it. Not creepy neighbors, not creepy coworkers. Step 1.5. The word intimately, gradually, over the years, got left in the wind. It's kind of a faint shadow now. Little more than vestigial chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro. What I'm saying is it used to be men that you know intimately, and it has gradually become men that you know. Leaving us with a step two that I'm sure we'd be better off without. The guys who get way too much anti-rape attention from way too many women are the creepy neighbors who wear sweatpants and the creepy coworkers who clean toilets. One example, this from the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 1997, pumps it up by a whole percentage point and has it that, quote, 77% of rapes are committed by someone known to the person raped, end quote. My critics might say that I want women to discount that 77% figure and instead concentrate on a smaller number, 76%. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that 99.5% of that 77% figure includes only men you would date, have as your boyfriend, or marry, a guy who then may end up being your ex. And it seems like that remaining 1/2 of 1%, creepy neighbors, creepy coworkers, get all the press, get all the publicity, and their heinousness festers. Anyway, step 3, actualization, or what this new, old, rape defense strategy looks like after indoctrination and during implementation in the real world. A few years ago, I worked for a boss who was also my patient to a limited extent. He had been locked up in various insane asylums more than 50 times before he started paying me to, first, help him move out of his mother's home, and second, continue on after that as his live-in caretaker, chef, chauffeur, etc. He took over 40 psychiatric pills a day. Our new next-door neighbor, this is after I helped him move in, was a stay-at-home mom, a woman who also ran an unlicensed child care facility, and she occasionally allowed her 2 preschoolers and some of her charges to play on their lawn, which abutted our lawn. Long example short, she let my 37-year-old boss, who received over $6,000 a month in disability benefits from Social Security and the military, talk and play with those tykes on our shared granary, unsupervised. Perhaps she looked out her window now and then, which is what I did, checking on my boss, who didn't strike me as the type to hurt kids, and wasn't diagnosed with anything of a sexual nature. She and my boss enjoyed something of a waving acquaintance, lightly friendly, but didn't talk much. At another man, her creepy neighbor who earned a few $100s a month taking care of a schizophrenic bipolar man, she glared and glowered and shook her keys like a madman. Did I ever tell her that she was probably shaking her keys at the wrong guy? That's in my footnotes. Another example of actualization, or how step 3 seems to be implemented in the real world, happened during this decade and partially at the office for a construction company where she and I worked in the same office, and it happened partially across the street at a factory not affiliated with ours. Without leaving out any important details, here's the abbreviated version. Subject almost always carrying her keys to and from lunch breaks in the parking lot, lightly shaking them occasionally at coworkers who appeared to be minding their own business, from what I could tell, but never at me, again, from what I could tell. Subject seen chatting and laughing with convicts on work release at the factory across the street during her lunch. As I didn't know her well enough to really get into her business, I asked a female coworker with whom I was well acquainted and who knew Subject better than I did, if Subject knew that those guys were inmates who went home each night to prison. Answers came back that she knew and had known about their living arrangements, and that she had just met those she was lunching with, and, quote, really wasn't worried, end quote. Now combine A, creepy neighbor, with B, creepy coworker, with C being the old standby, that strange-looking stranger at Wal-Mart, and the cycle is complete. Key shakers now shake their keys at those they are very, very likely to not date, while they get raped, in 76% of all cases, by men at whom they are not only unlikely to shake their keys, but they'll instead flirt with, hook up with, and possibly marry. It's like some evil force wants American women to do 2 things. 1, pal around with and even marry those who are by far the most likely to rape them, And two, train with negative reinforcement, i.e. shaking keys, certain men who evidently need training. Why they need this training or negative labeling, I'll get to in a while. What the men who need this training all have in common, almost to the man, is that they dress as though they frequent a certain type of haberdashery, or you'll notice them at a Target instead of a Chiefs game. Moreover, it can be demonstrated, as I do in my footnotes, thoroughly, that there's a conspicuous correlation, one that clocks in at about 0.83. That's the average of the ratios that I've found. And note, a 1-to-1 correlation is tops. That's as high as you can go. So 0.83, it's getting up there. Anyway, I get into this quite extensively in my notes. Okay, it can be demonstrated there's a conspicuous correlation between 1, typical key shakers, as per the Wal-Mart Chiefs dichotomy, and 2, women who report in self-administered surveys that they would not date a second time a particular man if he, for instance, took her on their first date to a restaurant with paper napkins and plastic cutlery instead of linen and silverware. In other words, women who employ key shaking selectively also employ similar mechanisms in their dating behavior, at least to the tune of a 0.83 correlation. That this correlation is so high supports my recent assertion that concentrating too much on the aberrations, stranger danger, doesn't leave enough time to learn how to properly vet those you date in terms of looking for signs that he might be a rapist, nor does it leave enough time to learn how to not date those who do show early signs of being a rapist. Hence, women who feverishly shake their keys inside a Wal-Mart with its ubiquitous security cameras and when no one's lunged at them nor grabbed a body part nor even said anything weird, but don't even carry, let alone shake their keys, while at a pseudo-groping hotbed like Arrowhead Stadium, are perhaps the most likely to fall prey to dating, even marrying, those who end up raping them. If it makes sense that a gentleman that a woman met at Arrowhead would in all likelihood, during the next week on their first official date together, take her to a restaurant with cloth rather than paper napkins. I'm trying to produce all these videos without stepping on anyone's toes. Perhaps fathers who don't want their daughters raped will end up being my only audience, though. I don't know. Hard to say at this point. Anyway, there's your sidebar. Up next, the conclusion of a different approach, or part 6 of The Woman with 1.5 Hands.